and the more recent
It's getting
one
closer.
seems to be the correct one, as far as, you know, all kinds of, both, you know, from text as well as from, you know, chemistry and, you know.
Yeah. But in his time, based on the research that he did, you know, he answered all the questions. There was still response. There was still a debate. It wasn't, but he felt that he had answered the questions. In fact, it was Yitzchak Elchanan of Kavna. He writes that he investigated it and he accepted that this was tchelis. However, he said that trying to work to save people who are in pikuach nefesh, who are in life-threatening situations. He was fundraising. I'm sure he had communal causes of great, great importance. And he says, if I put on tchelis in public, I will jeopardize these very important missions. And we know just about any mitzvah should not be done if it will jeopardize a person's life. So it's just interesting to show you the mindset that they lived in.
Did he ever bring up the fact that did he ever question his own in the Sefer? Say, maybe it's not, there's
three svarim, and I'm in the middle of, I've done half of the first. So I don't know if he ever, you know, he definitely, he does ask it, but those are questions and he responds to. He either brings other people's questions or questions that people have asked him and he responds to them. Does he ever say, well, I don't, at the end of the day, I really don't know?
Does he ever say that it's not, even if it's not real tchelis, it's not us to put it on?
My understanding is that tchelis doesn't necessarily have to be that particular thing. It could be, that may, the chilaz, I mean, I'm not clear on that. But I was unclear about that, but there was something that implied that it doesn't necessarily have to be as specific as, but that's not clear, so I don't want to answer you that conclusively. Yes.
Surely as you said, that, you know, he wanted to create a new way of thinking. So in doing what he did, whether it was the right mollusk or the wrong mollusk, is not really the point. The point is that he basically he wanted to subordinate the fear aspect of it. And so therefore he took a stand on it in order to get away from the taboos of what wasn't and create a possibility of what could be.
He definitely was trying to push the limits on something. In other words, he knew the way is not going to be like, well, now we're going to make a bracha on some chazer because we can be connected to God. He was not going in the direction that the Shabtai Tzvi went in or the Frankists went in. He was going in a totally different direction. He was not trying to leave Judaism or to take the antinomian, that streak of kind of rebellious ideology in his grandfather and father and his own teachings and try to do something radical that would say, well, I don't have to do this mitzvah. He, if anything, was trying to say, I don't want to be part of an establishment that keeps control over everything, but isn't necessarily so in touch with God. That's the tension that Ishbitz is all about. You see, in general, what the Misnagdim were afraid of when it came to Chassidus is they were afraid of the concept of mitzvahs maisius lav dafka, which means, I had a roommate who was very into this. In other words, anytime he would see a Hasidic teaching that would border on this concept, he would get all excited.
What is it?
And it means that doing specific mitzvahs, it's not as necessary as you think. It's more about the intent. Now, it doesn't really say this anywhere specifically that it's okay not to do mitzvah, but it's an underlying current that the Misnagdim picked up on, where they saw that the emphasis. Like there's a Brisker saying, the Brisker Rav said that he was making fun of Hasidim and Kavanah. He says, you can be misbeinen on tefillin all day. Think and meditate on the concept of tefillin all day, from morning when you wake up till night when you go to sleep. But if you didn't put on tefillin, you didn't do the mitzvah. With all the Kavanas. In other words, his point was is that we are bound to God only through mitzvahs. All the meditation, even learning, if it's not majorly de maisa, if the learning is divorced from practice, it's deficient. And they're very into learning. So the whole fear of the Misnagim and the Hasidim who are monitored themselves. You know how like Hollywood doesn't always wait for Congress to pass a law about lewdness, and it had many of its own people who would dictate to themselves what they could and couldn't do. It's a book about one of these people.
The Hayes
Yeah,
Commission.
exactly. Well, they had their own people that they would self-monitor so they didn't get destroyed from from the government. So Hasidim also had their versions of Rebbes and Hasidic movements who were constantly like checking themselves to make sure they weren't getting too out of line. They didn't want to be too out of line.
What's the principle of mitzvot?
Mitzvot ma'asiyot lav dafka. Mitzvot ma'asiyot, the physical mitzvahs. In other words, it could be about the spiritual mitzvahs. Lav dafka means, in other words, it doesn't mean that right now, today, you should not do a mitzvah. You shouldn't do kashrus or tefillin. What it means is that ultimately, the ultimate goal is the experience, not the physical conformity. And that will be experienced when Mashiach comes. It doesn't mean
supposed to engender, not necessarily what's supposed to.
Well, what it does. See, here's the thing. What were they breaking away from? What were Hasidim trying to break away from? Until then, orthopraxy, which is like the practice of Jewish ritual, halacha, and the learning about it, or the learning lishma, just the learning Gemara, that was the most important thing. Now, how did you get close to God? Through by feeling. If you did a mitzvah, you felt good about it. You felt you must have got. You don't have to know the details. You didn't need to know tamei mitzvahs, the meaning of the mitzvahs. You didn't have to have a particular kavanah. The kavanah was limited to the halachic requirement of the kavanah. So, for example, in all of davening, all you have to have kavanah for is the first pasuk of Shema. Better if you have it for V'ahavta, and the first three paragraphs of Shemona Esrei. You're Yotze. And by the way, it would be halavai we should all have kavanah for that much. but that's the Shulchan Aruch. That's just in the Shulchan Aruch. That doesn't mean the average misnagid or chassid is saying, okay, so let's do that. Of course, they're trying to do more. But the kavanah is pure. And what is the kavanah? Pirush hamilos. Knowing what you're saying, and also perhaps dalif neimiyat omid, kind of a general knowledge of being in God's presence. But how much did they learn about God's presence? It was all through Gemara. Now, Gemara has some mystical components in it, but most of the mystical components in Gemara are either very, very terse and not really well expanded on, or if anything, when you learn Gemara, the mystical parts of Gemara, you don't know what it's talking about, or you're like saying, I don't buy this. Like the more esoteric parts of Gemara don't resonate for people. So this is one of the things that the Gershon Hafel was trying to do. Is he was trying to find his way in the way of the Baal Shem Tov, to teach his way. It didn't mean you didn't have to do the mitzvahs. You had to do the mitzvahs. But it also meant that you weren't doing it out of fear. You weren't just doing it because of the symptom, so to speak, of Yosef, of living within the law because you didn't have a direct relationship with God. You didn't know how to ask God what He wanted at any given moment. So he was doing maybe some of this kind of semi-rebellious things or out-of-the-box things were part of that which in a way can be traced back to cuts, even though they broke away from each other.